Hey, so how 12 you? It's Friday, so pretty nice day coming into the weekend. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through. I know yesterday I kind of wanted you to go through the content section. It's going to be a little bit different in this last unit where I'm going to post a lot of the stuff in the news feed as opposed to going through the content. And I'll explain to that a little bit later. But today I'm just going to kind of introduce us to homeostasis. I kind of did a little bit of a brief introduction yesterday, but I kind of just talked about it. I'm going to kind of go through a PowerPoint presentation today that kind of just introduces you to the idea of homeostasis. Okay? All right, so introduction. So this is homeostasis, and then the idea is that you're maintaining the body within a specific set of parameters. And what I mean by that is the parameters could be your body temperature can be from this to that. It can't be outside of that. Your blood glucose levels can be from here to here, but they can't be outside of that. Your pH of your blood can be from here to here, but they can't be outside of that. So the idea behind homeostasis is that even though we are constantly experiencing changes, like the weather is changing outside, you might jump into a pool, you might drink a cup of coffee or a cold glass of water or eat ice cream. We have to make all these modifications so that the inside of our body doesn't change, despite the fact that we are making changes to the outside and inside to it. Okay? So homeostasis, it's the idea of maintaining balance in an unbalanced world. Okay? So when we do all these different activities, okay, the key thing is that we can't change our body 5 degrees either way. So, you're set at, say, 37.5 or 38 degrees Celsius. You can't go up to 45, and you can't go down to 28. You have to be set right around that 38 mark, despite the fact that, you're going to go to super hot temperatures. You're going to start exercising like this guy here. You go into the rain, and then you have to make an adjustment to make sure that the water's not cooling you down. You jump into a cold pool. So say this pool is 65 degrees. Okay, you're going to jump in. The inside of your body can't change. Even though the fact that you're in water that's 65 degrees Celsius, your body can't go to 65 degrees Celsius. And sorry, I'm going over to Fahrenheit. So say this pool is 20 degrees Celsius. Okay, your body can't go to 20 degrees Celsius, or you're going to die. So, you have to make all these adjustments constantly. In the wintertime, okay, we all live in Canada, so we experience cold weather. You go outside, your body can't be -5 like it is outside. It's got to maintain at 38. So we make all these adjustments in order for, our body to maintain this internal balance. So the body must maintain a number of different strict parameters in the internal environment in order to operate properly. Now here's a list of some of them. It's not all of them, but we can't vary our body temperature very much. Okay, our blood pH, blood glucose levels, okay, blood osmolarity. So that's basically how much water we have in there. You can't have too much testosterone if you're male. You can't have too little. Same with females. They can't have too much testosterone. They can't have too little. Okay? Males have to have the proper amounts of estrogen levels. And same with females have to have proper levels of estrogen levels. So these are just some of the things. We also have a number of other hormonal set points that we can't have out of whack. They've got to be, in this perfect parameter that our body is set. So homeostasis is really the study of how the body maintains a constant internal environment despite changes to both the external and the internal environment. Okay? So here's an example of, say, something when you eat something. Okay? When you eat something, what's going to happen is your blood sugar levels are going to rise. Okay? So you eat this cupcake, your blood sugar levels are going to rise. Well, now we've gone outside of the normal parameter. Our blood glucose levels are too high. So our body has got to make an adjustment, and the adjustment that we're going to make is we're going to release insulin. That's going to bring our blood glucose levels back down to normal. Okay, it lowers our blood sugar, and then we're happy again. We eat something more, our pancreas will try and reverse that by releasing some insulin, lowering our blood glucose levels. Okay. Well, what happens if we don't eat for a little while? If we don't eat for a little while and our blood glucose levels go too low, well, they can't be too low, just like how they can't be too high. So if they're too low, then our liver will release this thing called glucagon, which basically starts breaking down some of the stored sugars in our liver. And then we'll raise our blood sugar, okay, until it becomes an appropriate level. When it becomes an appropriate level, we'll shut down glucagon and have normal blood glucose levels. If it drops again, we'll just release some more glucagon and raise them back up. Okay. So how does the body do this? How do we maintain all of these different parameters and make sure that we don't go out of whack? Well, that's what we have organs for, okay? And that's what we have our central nervous system for. So the body maintains a constant internal environment by relying on the brain, the central nervous system, and the organs. Okay? So each organ plays a role in maintaining the internal balance of the body, or homeostasis. Okay, the kidneys play a role in determining, making sure that our blood isn't too thick and it's not too thin. Okay, our stomach plays a role in making sure that we extract enough glucose so that our blood glucose levels don't go too low. Okay, our liver plays a role in making sure that our blood's not too toxic. Okay, so we all of our different organs have different roles that they play. Now, how they all interact. Okay, now this is kind of my little analogy, but I mean, I think it's a good analogy. Is I like to say that there's a mini brain and then a master brain. So I call our normal brain, okay, or our regular brain, the master brain, and because it is in somewhat of control of all of these other organs, but not in ultimate control. A lot of these organs can function independently of the brain. Like the kidneys don't need to have all of their instructions sent by the brain. They can kind of function independently and just start filtering the blood and knowing what to do. Okay, so I consider them kind of mini brains because they don't need necessarily the brain. Now they are associated with the brain, and the brain can make modifications and changes to it, but they kind of function independently, just like how, say, the stomach does, or the lungs do, or the liver does. Okay. However, they are under the ultimate control of the brain. The brain is kind of just this regulator, and it's kind of like monitoring all of these organs and making sure they're doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, it tries to make modifications. So we kind of have a master brain, and then all the organs are kind of like mini brains. Now, this is a YouTube video that I'd like you to watch, so you can take a look at the link and just type that in, and then take a look at that video. There's a couple good videos in here that I'd highly suggest you watching, and they'll be inside the presentation. Okay, so let's go through the basics. So before we get into it, I mean, we're going to go through the brain, the central nervous system, the kidneys, and then we're going to go through our endocrine or hormonal system. But we're going to start with just kind of making some background on, like, how all of these systems work. Because how does the brain work, and how does the nervous system work, and how does the endocrine system work? They all follow this basics. So we're going to go over the basics today. And the first thing I want to talk about, and you should know this, is kind of our levels of organization from the very bottom all the way up. So we're going to start down at the atoms. Okay? So we know that cells are composed of chenops. Okay? So the chenops, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Okay? Now, that's at the atoms. So those are the atoms that we are composed of. Now, if we go one step up, those atoms, the chenops, go together to make macromolecules. Okay? And macromolecules are the proteins, the lipids, the carbohydrates, and the nucleic acids. So we're going one step up. We went from atoms to molecules. Now, molecules make organelles. Okay? So they are going to make a mitochondria. They are going to make a Golgi apparatus. They're going to make an endoplasmic reticulum. All those things are made out of macromolecules. Okay? So those are going to make the organelles. Well, once we have all the organelles made, we can actually make a cell, because all a cell is a whole bunch of organelles. So we went from atoms to molecules to organelles, and then to cells. Okay? Well, a bunch of cells working together and doing the exact same task is considered a tissue. Okay? So a tissue is a whole bunch of cells. It can be 1,000 cells, it can be 1,000,000 cells, all doing the exact same thing. Okay? Now, what an organ is several different tissues working together. Okay? So organs and tissues are different because tissues mean everything is exactly the same cell. Okay? But an organ has lots of different tissues. So in the stomach, you're going to have a certain tissue that's on the outside of the stomach. You're going to have a tissue that's on the inside of the stomach. You're going to have tissues that are, say, right here at the sphincters. And those are all different types of cells. So an organ is a whole bunch of different groupings of cells or a whole bunch of different tissues. Okay? Now, organs like to work together. Okay? And when they work together, they accomplish, a super task, and that's called an organ system. So a good example of one is the GI system that you went through in grade 11. You had the stomach, the pancreas, the liver, the small intestine, the large intestine, and they were all working together to accomplish a task of processing our food. And that's what an organ system is. Right? Well, all of our organ systems together, our cardiovascular system, our GI system, our endocrine system, our excretory system, all work together to run us, and we're considered an organism. So you should know that level of organization, from atoms to molecules to macromolecules to organelles to cells to tissues to organs to organ systems to organisms. Okay, from the smallest to the biggest. Okay. This I'm not going to spend too much time on. I don't want you memorizing this. People argue back and forth on what is considered an organ and what's not. Generally, organs by definition are required to maintain human life. Okay, I don't need my arm. If I cut off my arm, I'm still going to be alive as long as I don't bleed out. Okay, because my arm is not an organ. But if I cut out my liver, I would die. If I cut out my lungs, I'm going to die. If I cut out my heart, I'm going to die. So organs, by definition, are required to maintain human life. Now, which ones are organs and which ones are organ systems is debatable. So I'm not going to ask you that, okay? And the only other thing I want you to know is that organ systems always, regardless of which ones you think they are, either directly or indirectly depend on each other. Okay, so I already went through this, just homeostasis, and then talking about how you maintain a constant body temperature even if you go out to the desert, even if you're in the snow, if you're in the rain, or even if you drink a cup of coffee that's 65 degrees Celsius. You can't have your body spike to 65 degrees Celsius. So again, our overall definition of homeostasis is the actions of the body to maintain a relatively constant internal environment despite changing external and internal environments. And an example of the changing external environment would be like weather, as weather starts changing. Okay? An example of a changing internal environment would be like adjusting blood glucose levels. When you eat a piece of food, you brought that inside your body, so you changed the internal environment, and now your body's got to alter it to bring it back to normal levels. Okay, so last little bit, feedback systems. So whenever there's a change from the strict parameters the body requires, your blood glucose levels spike or your temperature spikes, the body will make adjustments to bring that physiological trait back to proper levels in most cases. Okay? Now the body does this in two different ways. The negative feedback loop, which is by far the most common, it is almost exclusively done using the negative feedback loop. But there's a couple rare examples that we use a positive feedback loop, and this is very different. So I'm going to go through the two of them, but again, keeping in mind the negative is much more important. Now, before we get into these negative and positive feedback loops, we're going to talk about some of the basics of them, okay? Because they both all work the exact same way. So a feedback system constantly monitors the physiological parameter, so it's got to monitor it, like glucose levels, body temperature, blood pH. If it senses a problem, so it senses a problem that your blood pH is off or that your glucose levels are high, then it can sense that. Then it develops a plan to fix it and fixes the problem. So it's all kind of a complete system here, the feedback. It's going to sense the problem, it's going to create a solution, and then it's going to actually fix the problem. Now, we have three different areas that do this. Okay. We have sensors, and sensors are there to just detect the change in the body. That's their whole goal, to just detect the change in the body. Then we have a control center. And our control center is basically receiving sensory information from the sensor, contains a database of allowable physiological values. So basically, once it gets the sensory information, it has to decide, well, is this parameter out of whack? Is the blood glucose levels too high, or are they perfect? Because sometimes the sensory information tells the control center, yeah, everything's great, because all the sensory information is just telling you signals. Okay, blood glucose levels are fine. They're fine. They're fine. Oh, no, they're high now. They're high. They're high. They're high. Okay, they're back fine now. They're back fine. They're back fine. Okay? The control center is making those decisions on whether or not they're fine or not. The sensor is just telling you the levels. Okay? The control center can also develop a plan to fix it. And if there is a problem, it can develop a plan, but it doesn't fix it itself. It actually sends it to an effector. And the effector's only role is to receive the signal from the control center and make the change. So they all have different jobs here. Okay? Now, there is some circumstances that the sensor and the control center are the same area. It's rare, but it does happen. Okay? But oftentimes, the sensor, control center, and the effector are all different parts of the body, and they have to communicate together. Okay? We're going to learn about how they communicate using the nervous system. So let's take an example of, say, heat. Okay? So say you get really, really hot. Okay? Your sensor, your body, and your hypothalamus, so it's a small little area inside your brain, is going to detect that your body is too hot right now. Okay? So it sends the signal to the control center and says, oh, the body is right now 40 degrees. Now the sensor doesn't determine that it's too hot. It just sends the signal the body is 40 degrees. The control center then says, okay, I've received that information from the sensor. I've looked at my parameters and said, okay, that's too hot. Okay, that's outside of my parameters. We should be 38, but the sensor's telling me it's 40. I've got to now decide on how I'm going to make a change. So it makes a change. Okay, and the control center happens to be the hypothalamus. It happens to be the same sensor as, or same as the sensor. Now, once the hypothalamus has both sensed that there's a problem, created a fix, it's going to send a signal to the effector to make the change. And the effector would be your skin cells. Okay? And your skin cells are going to start dilating. They're going to open up. They're going to allow a whole bunch of blood right to the end of your skin, and that's going to cool you down. It's also probably going to start releasing water on your skin surface as sweat in order to cool you down. So we've got a sensor. The hypothalamus tells the control center, which also happens to be the hypothalamus, that the body is too hot. The hypothalamus sends a signal to the skin to lower your body temperature. And then once the body temperature is back to normal, the sensor senses that and says to the control center, okay, stop doing what you're doing. We're back to 38. We don't need to affect the skin anymore. And then the skin, stops vasodilating. Okay. So both positive and negative loops use a sensor, control center, and effector, but the way they use it is quite different. Okay, so we're first going to look at the negative feedback loop because they are by far the most common. Okay? So in a negative feedback system, and this is the key, and you may want to highlight this, so if you're printing out these notes, these are things you highlight. When a change is detected, the response attempts to reverse that change. So if your body temperature drops, the response is to make changes to reverse this response and raise the body temperature. If your body temperature went too high, a negative feedback loop would try and lower your body temperature. So it always does the opposite of what just happened. Okay. So here's another example of a negative feedback loop. Okay, you eat a sandwich, your blood glucose levels rise. A negative feedback system states that you're going to try and lower those. You're going to try and reverse that change. So your blood glucose levels rise. Your body basically creates a response. So your blood glucose levels rise. Your pancreas detects that. That's the sensor. So the pancreas says, okay, I've got a high blood glucose levels. I've sensed that. The control center realizes that the levels are too high. It creates a fix to it. Okay? In this case, the pancreas is also the control center. It's going to initiate a response. Okay? It's going to start releasing insulin. Okay? So cells are going to be released from the pancreas as insulin. That's the effector. So really the pancreas is all three in this case. The effector releases insulin. Insulin is going to allow the reuptake of glucose. It's going to lower the glucose levels. Okay? And we're going to keep lowering glucose levels until the pancreas detects that they're back in normal state. Once they're back in normal state, it's going to stop releasing insulin, and we're back to normal. Okay? Now, a positive feedback system is very different. It's when a change is detected and the body tries to increase the degree of that change instead of reversing it like a negative feedback. So it will continue to go away from the normal set parameter until an endpoint is reached. So an example is childbirth. Okay, and that's the classic example. There's an example of a scab, but I like the childbirth example the best. So an example during childbirth. Okay? So our sensor here is going to be the cervix of the female. Okay? So when the baby's head basically presses up against the cervix, okay, the cervix senses, okay, this baby is coming. Okay? That's the sensor. Now, the sensor is going to send a signal to the effector, and that happens to be the brain. So the cervix is a sensor. It senses the baby's touching me. Okay, it wants to come out. I'm going to send a signal to my control center, which is going to be my brain. So my brain looks at this and says, okay, holy crap, this baby is coming. I've got to do something to initiate this baby coming. So the brain, being the control center, sends a signal to the muscles of the female that says start contracting. That's the effector. The muscles are the effector. They start contracting. Okay? So in a negative feedback system, which this is not, but in a negative feedback system, we'd say, okay, well, the baby's trying to give birth. Let's try and reverse that. And let's try and prevent that baby from coming out. Well, that would make no sense, right? In a negative feedback system, we can't use it for childbirth because we'd be trying to prevent the baby from coming out. And we don't want that to happen. We actually want the baby to come out. So in a positive feedback system, we're going to keep initiating this response. So what's going to happen is as the muscles contract, that baby is going to push harder on the cervix. The cervix is going to send a signal to the brain and says, oh, this baby is pushing even harder. The brain takes that signal and says, okay, go to my effector, make an even stronger contraction. Okay? We're moving even farther away from our normal set points. The baby pushes harder on the cervix. Okay, the cervix says, oh my God, this baby is really pushing on me. Sends that signal to the brain. The brain says, okay, great. We got to even push harder. Sends a signal to the effector. And then there's an even stronger contractions. So as females give birth, the contractions get stronger and stronger and stronger. And the reason for that is the positive feedback system is pushing you farther and farther away from normal set points. Okay? And then you're going to keep doing that until childbirth. And then once the child's given birth, that's when you've reached your endpoint. Right? So unlike negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops, there's an endpoint. The change will be continued to be exaggerated until that endpoint is reached. And an example would be like the development of a scab, or the more popular one, a baby being born. Okay? So what I'd like you to do for homework, okay, is to research several different feedback loops in the body, and then another example of a positive feedback loop. I'd like to make sure that you identify, the sensor, the controller, and the effector in each case. If you're pretty confident that you know your answers, then you can just keep them. If you're like, I don't know whether I did this right, you can send me an email with your answers, and I'll let you know whether they're right or not. Okay? So that's the big thing I'd like you to go through today, is going through, the basics. And again, you can take a look at that content section. I'd like you to go through basically content 1, 2, and 3. It'll go through the endocrine system a little bit. I'm going to go through the endocrine system a little bit more in depth. But again, during this unit, the content isn't the best in my opinion. So we're going to do a lot of our content in the news feed like I did today. So I'm going to upload this video as well as my PowerPoint presentation. So I'd like you to go through content sections 1, 2, and 3, which is what I asked you to go through yesterday. And then take a look at this video and then do that kind of some questions I asked you to do at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. And that's it. Now on Monday, we do have a PD day here, but I'm still going to post something. Okay, I'd like you to go through stuff. I mean, we're online students, so we can still access the internet, even though it's a PD day. I'm not going to give you a ton, but I'd like you to get, at least to log in on Monday so